Majority Report. The Majority Report with Sam Seder, where every day's Casual Friday. That means Monday is Casual Monday, Tuesday, Casual Tuesday, Wednesday, Casual Hump Day, Thursday, Casual Thurs, that's what we call it, and Friday, Casual Shabbat. The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
It is Friday, May 21st, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gohmert Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today from the Benjamin Dixon Show, Ben Dixon will be here. Also from the Give Them an Argument show, Ben Burgis will be here. In the meantime, Israel and Hamas agree to a ceasefire. Though, meanwhile, Israel storms Al-Aqsa Mosque again. House passes increased Capitol Police funding. Squad splits on the vote. Republicans in the Senate are determined to obstruct a January 6th commission. We'll tell you why that's going to have more implications than maybe just the January 6th commission. Missouri is sued to allow for a referendum passing expansion of Medicaid. The governor wants to put the kibosh on that. And Chris Cuomo of CNN sat in on strategy sessions for Governor Andrew Cuomo's sexual harassment responses. And the AP, however, fires a reporter for years-old writings that supposedly showed pro-Palestinian bias. The Ohio vaccination rate jumps 28% after their shot lottery rollout. New York State, others probably adopt similar schemes. Department of Homeland Security ends a deal to detain immigrants at 2 notorious county jails. And lastly, the Koch Foundation funding multiple court attempts to end the eviction moratoriums in this country. Isn't that lovely? All this and more on today's Majority Report. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is Casual Friday. As you can see, I am back and I am wearing my Casual Friday outfit, which is, of course, a soft-collared shirt. Emma Vigeland is here. I'll allow her to present her own wardrobe.
It's a white shirt. It's maybe, I was kind of in a rush this morning. Shouldn't have picked the 3/4 or 3/4 sleeves or 2/3 sleeves. It's getting hot.
It's getting hot.
But we stand for a soft collar shirt, right? It's going to be a Casual Friday. Do you know what stan is?
Do I know what the word stan means?
We stan a soft collar shirt.
We stand like we support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There we go. Wow, look at that.
Yep. I'm down with the lingo that is being used. We got a lot to get to today. Here is Joe Biden, and Joe Biden had announced on Wednesday, or I should say it was reported that on Wednesday morning, he had spoken to Benjamin Netanyahu and basically said, you have till end of day, our time, or maybe it was Israeli time, to work out some type of ceasefire. In other words, we want to pull the plug, which I think shows that the United States has a certain amount of influence with the Israeli government, that when the United States stands in the way of a UN resolution for a ceasefire, not necessarily because the UN has a lot of authority with the Israeli government, but if they allow it to happen, then they are putting their prestige on the line, and therefore Israel has to react. And clearly what Israel wanted to do was, we want to pound Palestinians in Gaza, take out their ability maybe for electricity. We want to put them on a diet, as they say, they've said in the past. We want to mow the lawn, as they have said in the past. And ostensibly it was to diminish Hamas's military capacity. Who knows exactly what it was? But the United States did not exert pressure until, we had hundreds of civilians killed. And but that pressure has been applied, and there was a response, though, limited as it were. Here is Biden in the White House yesterday talking about the ceasefire.
I also appreciate the contributions of other parties in the region who've been engaged in working toward the end of hostilities. These hostilities have resulted in the tragic deaths of so many civilians, including children. And I send my sincere condolences to all the families, Israeli and Palestinian, who have lost loved ones, and my hope for a full recovery for the wounded. The United States committed to working with the United Nations, and we remain committed to working with the United Nations and other international stakeholders to provide rapid humanitarian assistance and to marshal international support for the people of Gaza and the Gaza reconstruction efforts. We will do this in full partnership with the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, Authority, in a manner that does not permit Hamas to simply restock its military arsenal. I believe the Palestinians and Israelis equally deserve to live safely and securely and to enjoy equal measures of freedom, prosperity, and democracy. My administration will continue our quiet, relentless diplomacy toward that end. I believe we have a genuine opportunity to make progress, and I'm committed to working for it. And I want to thank you all, and may God bless you all, and pray that this continues. Thank you so much.
The end there, he's addressing, I think, the reports that the Biden administration was hoping to disengage from that, and they're going to continue their quiet diplomacy. In other words, the reason why you haven't heard about this diplomacy or any type of pressure exerted on Israel because we've been keeping it quiet.
Yeah, I returned to that 2001 quote from Joe Biden where he says that he believes that all differences between Israel and the United States should be worked out privately. He's extended that seemingly to his presidency and has, at least for the first 11 days, allowed Israel to murder hundreds of civilians, including over 60 children, as of what we know right now. And what bothers me about that statement, one, I'm happy that he did call on put pressure on Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire, although it seems like they're not necessarily holding up their bargain on that end, which we'll get to. But he talks as if the United States has no agency. Like as if we're watching this unfold in front of us. And
Right.
That's what bothers me about the framing from Biden.
There's a couple, that's basically, there's two things. One is that we keep our leverage exist in a completely different parallel universe to the conflict. And that leverage, of course, is the billions of dollars of aid that we send in terms of, in weapons support. That exists as if it's not part of the equation. But it is part of the equation. And then you watch these images that we're about to show of IDF forces.
Something like 15 hours after the ceasefire was agreed to / put in place.
You had IDF forces storming the Al-Aqsa Mosque grounds, not the mosque itself, but the sort of, I guess what Jews would call the Temple Mount. And also there were reports of more, removals and displacements of people in the Sheikh Jarrah, the neighborhood that in East Jerusalem, which was the sort of the catalyst for this. And so you have this conflict with Hamas and Israel is siloed, and just like the Palestinians who are killed by the civilian deaths, are somehow distinct from the conflict with Hamas and somehow distinct from Israel essentially attacking Palestinians in their homes in East Jerusalem and firing on people at Al-Aqsa. Here is the images of that. انتصارا لاهلنا بغزة. So they're firing rubber bullets. There are injuries and
tear gas. I believe flash bombs we're seeing.
Flashbangs, yes. I mean, so this is part of the problem. Is this sort of like attempting to divorce these into separate silos, and until there is a sort of a comprehensive view of what is happening to Palestinians in East Jerusalem, has impact on what happens in Gaza, has impact on what happens in the West Bank, and the United States sees that connection, we're just going to sideline our leverage. But
I'm sure they see that connection. It's just what they're going to admit publicly. And I just want to point out, this was a provocation to say that the Palestinians then violated the ceasefire when they retaliated with rockets. We don't know. They haven't done that yet, to my knowledge, at the taping of the show. But this is out of Netanyahu's playbook. Yeah. Provoke, provoke, provoke. Hamas, Palestinians respond. Oh, then we'll disproportionately respond, kill 10, 15, 20 times the amount of civilians on their side, and then say they're Hamas's human shields when it's the third most densely populated area in the entire world, and there is no battlefield. It's just a populated area with Palestinians that they, as you said the other day, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. So just know that this is clearly out of their playbook. And of course, it's always on the oppressed people, the Palestinians, the people fighting for justice, to be the bigger people in this instance. I mean, the burden is just unbelievable.
And this came up in our conversation with Noor Erekat a week or two ago, and that Ariel Sharon did the exact same thing that led to the second Intifada. This is it is a playbook that has been used. It's a well-worn playbook. All right, we got to take a break. We'll be back with more. We're going to talk to Ben Dixon about this and other developments happening in the news. Be right back after this. Folks, today's show sponsored in part by SunsetLakeCBD.com. SunsetLakeCBD.com. I've talked to you many times about their CBD products. Their tinctures are amazing. It helps me sleep. I have more or less almost totally off the Ambien at this point, every now and then. But the CBD has been really helpful in that regard. The salve with arnica and CBD also been very helpful to me with certain skin conditions, actually. I mean, it's supposed to be for achy muscles.
But you could use it on your knee.
I could use it on my knee. Yeah, but I don't think that's a muscle thing. But I got a knee problem. But the smokables, Matt is a big fan of the smokables. They have gummies. They have CBD infused fudge. They have pre-rolls. They have CBD dog biscuits. Very tasty for your dogs. Moderately tasty for your human beings.
Yeah, well, you can attest.
I can attest. But all this and more. But they're also a great movement company, if you will. They $15 minimum wage. They are mostly employee owned. They 100% organic. They practice integrated pest management. They also practice regenerative farming with help from the University of Vermont. All their business practices are great. And they also donate and support important causes They were doing stuff up in the near Burlington area where they were from. But recently, they just contributed and want to encourage everybody to contribute to the Nurses Fund in just, I don't know, I think it's a coincidence. In Worcester, Mass, there are 700 nurses who are have been on strike now for over 50 days. They are striking against St. Vincent's Hospital in Worcester, which is, full disclosure, both my sisters were born there. They are striking against a Texas-based corporation called Tenet. And they're basically striking because Tenet was cutting staffing so much that the nurses had genuine concerns about the safety of the people that they were supposed to be taken care of. Yeah. There were 600, if I remember correctly, 600 notices of problems over the last year, over which time Tenet made $400 million in profit. $400 million in profit. The revenue is in the billions. $400 revenue in $400 million in profit. And they just won't hire people. So the nurses have been on strike. Tenet now is claiming that they're hiring scabs. And you can support the St. Vincent's Hospital nurses like Sunset Lake CBD did we put the link in our podcast and YouTube description, but they left them $2,500. Obviously, individuals aren't going to have that kind of money, but if you can help out, they need the help there. And the more dollars that you give the nurses, the more they intimidate Tenet in the same way that Tenet's trying to intimidate these nurses by hiring people and scabs. So check that out. SunsetLakeCBD.com. Don't forget, if you go there, use our coupon code LEFTISBEST, and you get 20% off of any of their products you will enjoy. Also, the CBD embedded coffee.
I will say, my boyfriend's a bit of a CBD snob. Tried the tincture.
Yes.
Wow, this is amazing. Yep. Got a text.
Honestly, it is. There are a lot of CBD skeptics out there, and they are. Their skepticism is worthwhile because you need to have.
There's a lot of bad products out there.
Yes, there are.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Next sponsor. Is one of my favorite companies, Quip. They are, I'm going off the script here. I don't care. The thing I've spent too much time thinking about Quip because I love their toothbrushes. They have a what is it called? A flosser, a non-disposable flosser. And it is fantastic. It is honestly, it is one of the most ingenious things I've ever seen because I use a flosser all the time. I've really gotten into dental hygiene because it's super important. And as soon as you get old, you start to realize, like, darn it, I should have started this 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But, really, probably I should have started earlier, but, as a kid. And they have also now a gum dispenser. Gum is the unsung hero of dental hygiene. If you have a sugarless gum, you chew it 20 minutes after you eat. It helps with cavities. It helps with periodontal issues because you don't want bacteria growing in there and it starts to screw up your gums. That's the biggie right there, folks. Believe me. And they have developed all of these ways. They're basically a design company that has tackled how do you make people pay more attention to their dental hygiene? How do you make it easier? And the gum is a perfect example of this. It comes in a dispenser that's sort of like Pez. I think I can say that.
Yeah.
The gum is great. It's crunchy on the outside, the minty on the inside. My kids love that gum even. You can have it with you all the time, and it's very stylish. And put it in your pocket. You don't get lint in your gum anymore. There's all sorts of... it
doesn't melt in your pocket.
Doesn't melt in your pocket? Yeah. No, it's fantastic. And also, they never promote it. I don't know why, but their flosser is amazing. And the whole thing is great. You sign up, you subscribe, they sent you the brush head on a regular 3-month basis. And so you never have to worry anything. It's like a one-stop shop, and it makes it much easier. It's the same thing with the vaccinations, right? They're putting the lottery. You're starting to realize, it's weird things that get in the way of people taking care of themselves. And Quip has figured out a way to design this stuff in such a way that it takes away a lot of the obstacles. So if you go to getquip.com/majority right now, you can get a free plastic dispenser with any refill plan for the gum. That's a free dispenser at getquip.com/majority, spelled GETQUIP.com/majority. Quip, the good habits company. And lastly, this is actually great. You know, I mean, I've talked in the past about different sort of, you buy different services that will send you ingredients to make a meal. One of the problems I've had in the past, some of them I've enjoyed, but they take too long. Welcome HelloFresh. You get fresh, pre-measured ingredients. They got great seasonal recipes. It's delivered right to your door. You skip the trips to the grocery store. You count on HelloFresh to make cooking easy, fun, and affordable, and quick, relatively quick.
Quick. Gotta
Yes.
be quick.
It is America's #1 meal kit, and that's why, I think, from my perspective. HelloFresh offers 25 recipes to choose from each week. They got vegetarian meals, they got craft burgers, they got extra special gourmet options. There's something for everybody to enjoy. All recipes are designed and tested by professional chefs. They have nutritional experts to ensure the deliciousness and the nutrition and really, at the end of the day, the simplicity. You can try meals that will be ready in 20 minutes or less. That means like you don't have to like be an expert chef to dice this stuff in 14 different ways and all these garnishes. Like you get lightning quick recipes. You provide a good home cooked meal for your 2 children who can be very difficult at times. So I don't have 45 minutes to prep the meal. I got to be able to do it quick. HelloFresh is 28% cheaper than shopping at your local grocery store, 72% cheaper than a restaurant meal, and you sacrifice no quality. In fact, in my mind, it's home cooked. You know what's in it. HelloFresh has been named Newsweek's most trusted meal kit company of 2021 with over 4 million households served. You got to check it out, folks. HelloFresh.com/majority12 and use the code majority12 for 12 free meals, including free shipping. That's HelloFresh.com/majority12 and code majority12 for 12 free meals, including free shipping. Check it out. As always, we put all of our links in the YouTube and podcast descriptions. All right. Want to welcome back to the program, as we do on many Fridays, the host and proprietor of the Benjamin Dixon Show, Ben Dixon himself. Ben,
There we go.
there you go.
There he is.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Nice to see you, Ben. Thanks for Emma's here, obviously.
Hey, Emma, how are you? Sam, how's it going? Thanks for having me today.
Always a pleasure. All right, so Ben, let's there's some let's talk first about what's going on with Israel and Palestine, particularly from. I mean, I want to talk about just the conflict in and of itself, but then I want to slide it into domestic politics because that is, to the extent that we have any influence over it, that is the domestic politics come into it. But I mean, from your perspective, what what's your just broad take on what we've seen over the past couple of weeks?
I mean, well, first and foremost, you, the two of you and Emma, you guys have done some amazing coverage this week. I've been able to jump in and catch clips of what you guys have been covering, and really appreciate it. And I start with that context because there's a noticeable shift in the conversation, in the discourse right now that I haven't seen in my lifetime. And it's the people honestly being able to connect with the humanity of the Palestinians, and the fact that for so long there was this seamless conflation between the Palestinian people and of late Hamas, which was used as a justification to just dehumanize and to disconnect the humanity of the women and children who have been killed in these attacks. And just watching the videos, social media has played a huge part in changing the narrative, but being connected to what's happening there almost in real time and seeing the suffering, it really wasn't possible. It wasn't tenable for the media to do what they started off doing. I don't know if you remember at the beginning of this last week, ABC News, NBC, all of them started with the standard talking points of Hamas and this and you know, the terrorist attack and justifying Israel's disproportionate response. And so that has changed significantly. And I think it's about time because as Bernie Sanders said yesterday in his speech, or rather Wednesday in his speech, Palestinian lives matter.
So how much of this conversation do you think has shifted because of, and, you know, I spoke with Dave Zirin of The Nation the other day for the other show we do on Peacock about how Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, spoke out about, you know, Palestinian rights and stuff. And I just feel like there's been a connection between an internationalist, anti-racist perspective that, like, is, I think, step two of the national awakening, not enough, but that a lot of people had in the wake of the George Floyd murder. Like, can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's really kind of the next evolution in this.
Yeah, I love the way you frame that, because when you consider the alternative, like the pan reactionary movement, right? They're reactionaries across the globe who are uniting with their desires for ethno states, their own little regional hegemonies where they're able to control and dominate their local politics, domestic politics without any international influence, right? That's happening in real time. And the counterbalance to that is the more of the internationalist perspective, right? Where we see humanity in every person, and not just humanity in the people who look like us or have our same politics or whatever subgroupings these reactionaries default back to. But yeah, I honestly think that, you know, in the wake, things have changed a lot since COVID-19 in general. And, you know, that shifted the perspective, not only in terms of our international solidarity, but also solidarity around understanding our position, our class positions that changed, but then also the George Floyd protests, the way the world was able to see just how barbaric this system can be to all people, but specifically Black people. There was a catalyst. And then the solidarity with the Palestinian people giving, you know, online, social media, giving techniques on how to survive gas attacks and, you know, different things. It was just, there is a level of solidarity that we have now because of the interconnectivity that exists because of social media, but also in response to the barbarity that we're seeing from people with power.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and I want to go back just to the point you had made about people seeming to have more of a sense of the humanity of Palestinians. I mean, it is amazing to me. And for years, and I'd say, like, you know, over the years, my coverage of at least, you know, while I've been doing this professionally, of the Palestinian Israeli conflict, as it were, has been, you know, more or less the same. It's just there has been very little traction for that.
Oh, yeah.
And it is amazing to me, though, now that what you were saying about with Hamas and the attempt to sort of like use Hamas as a way of obscuring the humanity of the Palestinian people. Something when you said that, like the idea that they're still trotting out this thing of Hamas using Palestinians as human shields.
Right.
I don't know exactly what that means in this regard. Like you know, Gaza's an open air a jail essentially. I don't know where Hamas would be.
Right.
They're not amongst the people living there. It's not like, I mean, this is, but it's also sort of like, okay, let's stipulate that that's the case. You still have to deny the humanity of those human shields if you're just going to shoot right through them.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest. Like, I mean, you're going to have to, like, you know, if you're really like holding Hamas to some standard that they are, you know, ruthless, and okay, let's just stipulate for the sake of argument they are, but they're still human shields. Right. They're not shields, right? I mean, it sounds, to hear that now sounds just much worse in my ears than it did maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah, and actually, I want to start where you started, right? The coverage that you've given consistently. You know, Mark Lamont Hill lost his job on CNN as a result of his advocating on behalf of the Palestinian people. I mean, it was honestly the thing that you just couldn't talk about in a lot of circles. In fact, I don't know if you guys have gotten any flack, but I got so much flack even just retweeting stuff in support of the Palestinian people, and which told me I had to get certain people, you know, I had to take a look at my phone, my Rolodex, and see why they're in there in the first place. But to what you're saying, here's the other aspect of it. Like, you know, with all their precision targeting and all their intel, they don't seem to ever be able to get rid of the rockets that Hamas has, right? But they constantly say that they're using the Palestinians as human shields, but they have no regard for obliterating Palestinian lives. Like, I would love to see more pictures. If this is really your concern, Israel, then send us the pictures of you having a precise strike on the missile locations. Like, show us some of the armaments that you've destroyed, because all I've seen have been broken bodies, children, mothers, fathers. There's a YouTuber who I did a segment on, a YouTuber who had a channel. His name was Ahmed. His last name escapes me, but he had a YouTube channel with his daughters. And his last video before he was killed in these airstrikes was him comforting his daughters on a vlog as they were trying to hide and they were scared. He was trying to tell them that everything would be okay. That's what we're seeing. And I never seem to find any instance where they actually successfully struck Hamas in terms of the rockets. But it is a useful narrative. It is a useful trope that is social media ready. And this is the response. And you know, Sam and Emma, you both know, like, a lot of people need in terms of reactionaries, all they need is just one sentence that they can cling to and repeat. And so that sentence is nothing more than a talking point, but it's been a powerful one for years. And I think finally now, because we are seeing in real time the murder and the massacre of real human beings, that talking point doesn't carry as much weight.
Yeah. And so let's talk about what's happening domestically. I mean, we've touched on it a little bit in terms of, you know, the response to people who are advocating on behalf or even just recognizing the humanity of the Palestinians in this situation, and how quickly it seemed like it was easy to catch the Biden administration. And I don't think their rhetoric is any different than anybody else's. It's just that they're on some level, people have caught up to it. This idea that, okay, Israel has the right to defend itself. Well, what about the Palestinians? Like, you know, and it's just, these are questions that you just never heard in the past.
Right.
It seems so obvious to ask, like, okay, but there's two sides to this conflict. And so, I mean, why does, you know, and why is what's happening in East Jerusalem so distinct from what's happening in Gaza? I mean, like, why are those seen as like completely separate incidents? And so, but what do you think is happening in this country in that regard? I mean, you've touched on it a little bit, but the Biden administration, I think, was more than happy to just sort of try and pretend none of this was happening. They never wanted to get into a situation where they had to sort of call for a ceasefire. I don't think Israel, certainly, there's no sense within the Israeli press that Israel achieved what they supposedly set out to do. I've read many articles saying that just from a military standpoint, this is one of their greatest failures, in part because it's not like the armaments that Hamas is bringing into Gaza are massive armaments. They are, you know, they are small enough that they can be smuggled in when they're completely, essentially, have no access to their own border. And so this is, you know, it's like slingshots, essentially. There's so many you can get. But give me your sense of of how the internal politics have changed and what that means for the future.
Yeah, well, starting with the Biden administration, I think Ned Price, the spokesperson for the State Department, if he still has a job, well, we'll see, because I think his incompetence in answering, or his inability to answer whether or not he and as a result, the Biden administration could condemn the murder of those children, and he couldn't do it. And because he could not do that, and the journalists who kept asking the question and not letting him off the hook, actually, for me, I don't know if it did for anyone else, but for me, it set a chain of events in motion where you're not able to even recognize the humanity of children who are being blown apart by bombs, then you're on the wrong side of this. And anybody who is standing on that side of this is clearly morally wrong. And that was attached to the Biden administration immediately. And of course, there are always a number of voices, a lot of voices who are always standing for the liberation of the Palestinian people. but they got some backup this time. And I think there has been strength in numbers this time, where the penalty for speaking out on your own as a truth teller, like Mark Lamont Hill was on CNN, the penalty has been reduced. And a lot of people have already paid the price, right? They've already been kicked out of these organizations. So there are a lot of people who were looking for more voices. And I think more voices actually just showed up to the equation. And then it just also goes to the extent of these talking points, how frivolous they've been and how illogical and how dehumanizing they have been all of these years. I think we as a collective body politic of decent human beings, we've been able to get a little bit sharper in our rhetorical responses and unpacking these. And social media, honestly, like, you don't stand a chance on social media if you're coming the way that they used to come for years and years and years. Is almost exactly like the Ned Price exchange with that journalist. So I think a combination of strength in numbers, a combination of social media, as well as a combination of people who have been consistently telling the truth all this time, finally probably shift the balance of the conversation, because the Biden administration could not get away with it. And this is one of the best thing about the Biden administration is that they actually feel the impact of the voices who are speaking up. And we've seen them backtrack on a lot of things that they wanted to do consistently, like the Trump administration. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that with this situation as well.
I'm curious about, what one of the rhetorical tricks that bothers me so much about this conversation is, Sam touched on it a bit, but the conflation of Hamas with the Palestinian people, right?
Right.
Like, talk about that, because no one's conflating the right-wing government of Israel, the Likud party, with the entire population of Israel. So for just really quick, when the United States was committing state-sponsored terrorism, often does, like say in the years of the Iraq War, there was no conflation with the Bush administration and the entire population of the United States. Like, this is, I feel like, a rhetorical trick that is reserved for just powerless people. Then they're terrorists, right?
Yeah. No, actually, yeah, I was going to say something else, but that last sentence you said, it is a rhetorical trick that is used on powerless people. It's the same thing that we see whenever someone has, whenever somebody discusses Black Lives Matter, they speak of the Black community as a whole. They take the very worst example that they can find from the Black community, and then they apply that to the entirety of the Black community. It's something that I've seen all my life. And you don't get that. And here, check this out. If we were to conflate the right-wing government of Benjamin Netanyahu, not only with the entirety of the Israeli state, but with Jewish people, then there's an entire category for us to be lumped into, rightfully so, as anti-Semitic. Right. But they have that shield. They have that level of protection, and it's not afforded to powerless people. In this case, the Benjamin Netanyahu right-wing regime certainly does not represent all of the people in Israel, and certainly does not represent all the people of Jewish people. But that same humanity and that same distinction is not afforded to the people of the Palestinian people, simply because they need the powerful need to be able to execute their goals. Here's the thing, even though it may not have been a successful campaign, as you were talking about, Sam, militarily, the Associated Press just put out an article yesterday saying that this has breathed new life into Benjamin Netanyahu, who is basically on the ropes in terms of his political career and his ability to form a coalition government, as well as the criminal charges that he's potentially facing. But this has been successful for him, even if it's not successful for the Israeli government, the military, and certainly it is a disaster for the Palestinian people.
Well, without a doubt. I mean, there's no coincidence that these attacks on Sheikh Jarrah and the Al-Aqsa Mosque happen literally the day after he's unable to, the deadline for him to create a government. I mean, there's no coincidence here. And I mean, let me, I want to ask you, I mean, there's two things. One is from the press perspective, what I found interesting is that there are still vestiges. I mean, things have changed, right? I mean, people, you said earlier, people are getting smarter, and we are definitely seeing on the sort of like, I don't know, within the general population, a shift, it feels like to me, without a doubt. I'm just based upon just like my, what normally happens around this time in my social media, my emails, my conversations with, I mean, I think there's just a shift. But we see stuff like the AP fired a reporter because apparently a couple of years ago when she was in college, she wrote articles or whatever it was, tweets.
She was a part of I have it here. She was essentially part of Jewish Voices for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine when she was at Stanford. And then on Sunday, she posted a tweet critiquing the media's coverage of what happened in Sheikh Jarrah. And so then they connected those two. She has too much of a bias and she's got to go.
Republican, apparently like the kids from the Republican
Stanford.
Stanford students or something dug it up.
Yeah.
Talk about cancel culture.
But there's a cancel culture issue to be made there. But it's also sort of like Wolf Blitzer literally worked for AIPAC. And, I think AIPAC has a bias, obviously. I mean, okay, that's fine. I understand that. But why is it that Wolf Blitzer, and obviously AP, CNN, they have maybe different standards, particularly based on what we saw with Chris Cuomo.
But CNN, on Hill, though.
But I mean, do you, are there... do we need to go in? Does the AP at this point now need to go and look at everybody who went on birthright trips Israel, or who have maybe in their personal lives donated to Israel? I mean, what constitutes here? That just seems so anachronistic to me. This idea that you're going to have reporters who have had no history of support from one side or another, and that it's only when you show support for the Palestinians that. I mean, could anybody imagine, honestly, the AP saying, well, we found out that when that one of our reporters, when they were in college 2 years ago, let's say, they went to a Israeli Independence Day march. Mm-hmm. And we fired them. I mean, people would just be like, what? I mean, of course. I mean, and I feel like to a certain extent, though, we're getting that reaction in terms of this reporter, and that's new too.
Yeah, that one blows me away, especially when you consider the AP's building was leveled in this conflict, and you would think that they would have at least a moment of reflection. But I think it goes back to what you were saying, Emma, when you were saying how one group is lumped together and we have distinctions for the other group, but it's always the powerless that are lumped together. In this, it's similar in that, whenever you see the mainstream media in this country, there's always this ridiculous effort to do a both sides. They're constantly seeking to draw an equivalence between both sides, no matter how ridiculous the other side is. Anybody who ever said anything positive about Palestine apparently doesn't get that luxury of having a both sides, because it's like, here's a side where if you stood for them previously or even currently, you can find that you will be absolutely canceled, and that would be the end of your career. So I just think it just really shows you the depth of how asymmetrical this conversation has been in this country for a very long time, and it has everything to do with power. It has everything to do with power.
Give me your sense of where the Democrats have turned, because, I mean, as early as Tim Kaine and a couple other senators basically saying, I'm not going to this talk that Netanyahu's giving to the joint session of Congress. This is during Obama's years.
Yeah.
It seems to me that we've been on a clock where it's just like we're going to see a continued diminishment of support of Israel, knee-jerk blanket, no unquestioned, unconditioned support in the Democratic Party. And we're starting to see, it's small, but we're starting to see that sort of hold that Israel has on, frankly, on our entire politics. But within the Democratic Party, we're starting to see it shake just a little bit. Resolutions coming out from the squad about holding off on arms sales. I mean, give me your take on that.
I think that's actually... I thank you for that historical perspective. I mean, historical back in Obama administration with the Tim Kaine, because I completely forgot about that. So it has been slow going, and I can't really speak to what their motivations were. But if they have faced anything like I faced just this week, where the simple recognition of the humanity of another human being is met with the full-throated attack of people that you normally would think were your allies. If Democrats have been facing that, which I'm sure they absolutely have, times 10, right? Times 100. I think at a certain point, you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, holy crap, what are we doing here? If my if my comradeship, right? If your support comes with me losing my humanity, then I can't support you anymore. That's, to me, that would be the easiest answer as to why we're seeing a slowly but surely loosening grip over the control that these powerful lobbyists really have. I mean, it's and there was a time when you could say that sentence and be called anti-Semitic, but let's just be real. I mean, we talk about money in politics all the time, and there is a lot of money in the right-wing government of the right-wing perspective of AIPAC that has had an undue influence on the Democratic Party when the Democratic Party is supposedly fighting on behalf of things that are really anathema to AIPAC. And so I wonder if they're distancing themselves slowly but surely because that friendship that has been at the core of the Democratic Party, it really is at this point, you have to just simply ignore the humanity of other people for it to maintain.
You know, we should say that the idea of the lobbying that goes on is not powerful. You know, there's two things that come to mind. One is Thomas Friedman made that case, I don't know, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. But also Ilhan Omar made that case 2 years ago, was it? Yeah. And they, maybe 2.5 years ago. And Nancy Pelosi basically walked all over H.R. 1, the rollout of H.R. 1 at that time after the Democrats had taken Congress to run to be the first to, basically throw Ilhan Omar overboard. And what's fascinating to me is that over the course of those 2.5 years, and I don't know if it's like you say, like maybe it was the Floyd protests. Yeah. Maybe it is just generational. Like there has been a shift over the past couple of years where the ballast has moved a little bit in the Democratic Party, where younger people just have more authority in the context of the Democratic Party and more control over messaging because of social media. But Ilhan Omar, now has the idea that they would attack her. Now, no, they cannot do that. And they're not doing it. I mean, we're just, I mean, obviously there's
AIPAC is, but
well, yes, yeah. but it's not being joined by, people who are ostensibly
Pelosi,
right? Exactly.
Right.
And so that I think is a fascinating turn, just to watch.
But look at what the price of that turn, right? How much it cost. It literally cost the lives of children and women, and seeing their bodies broken on social media and seeing, bombings on, because if had Benjamin Netanyahu not really overplayed his hand, right? If I could be so coy as to compare it to a poker hand, he really thought that he could get away with it this time, right? At the same level. Had he not overplayed his hand, I'm pretty sure we would still see some of that same reaction from people like Nancy Pelosi. But it is so egregious at this point that you can't help but to look at what Ilhan Omar is saying and say, well, damn, she's right. And if I speak out against her, then I'm going to look wrong. So I think it may just be a result of Nancy Pelosi being pushed into a corner because of how egregious these last 11 days have been.
Interesting. Yeah. And all right, so let's turn to, we've established this dynamic, Joe Biden, a bit of a cipher in this circumstance. Good. I repeat what I said in the run up to the 2020 election, which is Joe Biden's my second favorite type of politician, a cipher who has really no sort of necessarily core other ideology other than wanting to be, firmly in the middle of the Democratic Party. So the more you pull on the left, the further left he'll come. There's only so much pulling you can do, but it's because there's forces pulling him to the right as well. Right. But, yeah, let's turn to another set of domestic politics, and that is this vote for this January 6th commission. There, on one hand, I'm like, whatever. On the other, I mean, honestly, because on the other hand, just looking at it from a political standpoint, because I don't know what gets resolved from this, right? Like we had a 9/11 commission. There was stuff that came out. It's good for the history books, but it didn't impact our politics in any type of measurable way, in my estimation. People even forget George Bush, Dick Cheney. They refused to cooperate. At one point, they only had they allowed Bush to be interviewed for like 15 minutes, as long as Cheney was there, whispering in his ear, literally. And so, but I think the political salience of this is a little bit greater than that. Like, I think because January 6th is really about the Republican Party. Whereas 9/11 was about maybe how, this administration responded at that time in that moment. But this is about a political party, both the elected leaders in the House and the Senate and in the administration, and to what extent there was any type of relationship between people who were inside the building and the people who were supposed to be outside the building and came in. And this seems like, and then the question is the obstruction by the Republicans, because we're going to see it in the Senate, right? Mm-hmm. Does that have any impact on Joe Manchin's branding exercise when it comes to acknowledging maybe the Republicans aren't going to vote for anything? And so therefore, if you want to get anything done, it's too obvious that they are not going to do anything.
That's interesting framing. Well, let me start at the beginning of what you were saying. I agree that I think it's more salient because it is going to be a direct reflection on the role that the Republican Party had in the buildup to January 6th, even if it's only through Donald Trump. But I think as this investigation goes, if it actually commences, I think you're going to see exactly to what extent Republican officials were complicit with this, and this is why we're going to see the level of obstruction that they attempted in the House, but they didn't have the numbers that they needed, obviously, and then we're going to see the same thing in the Senate. The problem is for Joe Manchin, right? The problem is for Joe Manchin because everybody knows. Everybody is crystal clear where Joe Manchin actually stands on these issues at this point. Whether or not his voters actually are paying attention, that remains to be seen for his next election. But at the end of the day, Joe Manchin is really the chief obstructionist at this point. And if I could just broaden it a little bit and talk about even with HR 1 and the voting rights and trying to restore voting rights in this country, he's already set himself as an obstacle there. And the real question is to what extent can the Democrats do anything with him? And if they can't, then I mean, honestly, Sam, I don't know. I think that's basically it, with not only in terms of the commission, but in terms of the agenda for the Democrats as a whole. And as you see the things that the Republican Party they're doing across this country, I mean, Joe Manchin is a problem. And I was just over here Googling, I'm like, when is his next election? Because the honest truth is that if we continue to have Democrats like Joe Manchin on our team, then there's absolutely nothing that we can get done in the broader context of progress in this country.
I mean, I agree with that, but there was an attempt to primary him this year. He lives in a state that voted for overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. And so, I mean, I don't think this is a guy who's going to in any way respond to the idea that he's going to have a progressive challenger, let's say. In fact, I would say that from his perspective, he wants one. Yeah. Because, I mean, if he could get AOC to come to West Virginia and say, Joe Manchin's doing, bad things, I think he would pay her to do that because of where he wants. So, I mean, the real question is, what can the Democrats do? I mean, aside from, Joe Biden going down there, and I think I think in some ways it's too easy to say that Joe Biden has some magic elixir that is going to make Joe Manchin not do what Joe Manchin thinks is in Joe Manchin's best interest, regardless of what Joe Biden says. But, because I don't know what he says to him personally, if he doesn't have a file on him or something, and, but the idea that the Republicans are not engaging in something that is more about civics, as in January 6th.
Right.
Does that give Manchin room to go look, everybody knows that I'm a guy who believes in bipartisanship, and I've been the one holding back on the, AOCs in the, the Democratic Party. But if the Republican Party won't even vote to find out who physically stormed the Capitol, like I don't have a partner over there or something. I don't know. I'm asking this. I'm floating this out. If this has,
I guess, I'm scared to go down that line of reasoning, which it absolutely makes sense what you're saying. But I guess at the end of the day, it's like, what does Joe Manchin actually have to lose? Because if he is as secure in his seat as he knows that he is, and he already stands in opposition to a whole lot of things that the Democratic Party wants, he can weather a couple of news cycles. And at the end of the day, it really just depends on how much political pressure can be put on him from the Democratic Party right now, like internally, but he has a strong hand to play, being he's made himself the centerpiece of the conversation in almost every issue we've seen so far. I think and I don't know to what extent the upcoming deliberations that the Supreme Court is going to have on the Mississippi abortion case, I don't know to what extent that would have a negative impact on him in his home state. But I do know that case probably can shift the balance in the Senate if it goes the way it most likely is going to go. And so I'm saying that in the long term, I don't really see a short-term solution to Joe Manchin, and he knows that. So we really have to look at like what potential do we have in 2022, 2024. And then here's the last thing about it. It really adds a lot of fuel to the fire when we're talking about voting blue, no matter who. It absolutely just obliterates that argument. No one can ever ask us to do that again when we have somebody like Joe Manchin who's literally standing in the way of even our ability to vote.
To me, I mean, like, Joe Manchin gets a lot of press in this area because of, just I think how much he centers himself. Mm-hmm. To me, the biggest obstacles are like Mark Warner and Sinema in Arizona. I mean, those, like, as Sam has said throughout this, President Manchin era, it's a branding exercise for him. So that's a lot more malleable than, say, I think Sinema, who has, I don't know, some sort of deep adherence to this kind of iconoclastic image she's trying to present. It's a branding exercise in and of itself. The Warner example is probably a better one. He represents industry. He represents capital. And I think that's very different than what Manchin's doing.
Well, I mean, Manchin does that too. I think Warner just does it in a quieter fashion. And he's going to, his agenda is more ideological on some level than Manchin's. But
I mean, Manchin's beholden to I think the coal industry. But
the bottom line, though, is this: is that at one point we are now. It is now basically June 1 for the sake of my math, so that I know 6 months have passed. As opposed to trying to calculate. I think we're 3 or 4 months, and that's it. I mean, if we don't, this is the next 90 to 120 days, it seems to me, and a big chunk of that they're going to be on recess, is going to dictate, essentially the Biden term and how badly the Democrats do in 2022. There have been sort of there's different, it depends on what you want to look. There was in Georgia, as you know, I'm sure you know this story of the Republicans held these sort of town meetings, and they were overwhelmed with participation. People coming out of the woodwork who participated in their Georgia state, Republican Party stuff. They are heavily energized by this whole stop the steal thing. Mm-hmm. And Trump voters who came out who had never participated in these things before. Now, that could be just an internal struggle, but I there's reason to believe it's more than that. And just in terms of enthusiasm and whatnot, 2022 rests in what happens over the next 30, 90 days. You may get a situation where a Warner steps in and is like, we're gonna kill the tax increase and the step up basis on state taxes and whatnot. It's really just a question, though, ultimately, of Manchin signing on to the filibuster. And it's hard to imagine that Sinema, who has her own branding exercise, like you say, Emma, is able to be to the right of Joe Manchin. Right? Because Joe Manchin has an excuse. He has 60%. He's in a 60% Trump state. Kyrsten Sinema is not. And so there's going to be a lot more heat on her. She needs to draft, essentially.
I think she relishes in it.
Well, it'll be interesting.
And Manchin feels pressure when it comes to that stuff. We saw him kind of respond. You know?
I guess. I haven't seen Kyrsten Sinema get out ahead of Joe Manchin on anything. And I don't think she will, but she might. You might be right about that. But I have a feeling that Joe Manchin, it's just much harder for Joe Manchin, for Kyrsten Sinema, if she's out there on her own limb without Joe Manchin. And so I guess we're going to know about this. It's really just going to come down to filibuster reform.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Joe Manchin has kind of made himself, well, no, he hasn't made himself clear on there, because at one point he stated that he was open to to a standing filibuster. And I think he walked that back later. It's been a long couple of months. But to that end, though, the Democratic Party has a major problem on its hands, because what the Republicans are playing for keep, right? They're playing for keep. They're going for everything right now. They're shooting their shot on abortion rights. They're shooting their shot on voting rights. They're shooting their shot on democracy in general. January 6th was not the culmination. It was the beginning. And if Democrats don't really understand the score and start to fight just as dirty as Republicans, then they're going to quickly find out that they were outmaneuvered by the Republicans over a 40-year span. And we're going to find ourselves with the inability to undo the damage. Like we have a very short window to undo the damage that they have been working on for the last 40 years. And I think this is an inflection point right now. And unfortunately, Joe Biden might be listening, but I don't think Nancy Pelosi is listening. And I don't think Joe Biden is listening hard enough and understands the score just yet, because I don't think anyone should look at what the Republican Party is doing across this country and think of it as anything else other than an outright war on our democracy and outright war on our rights as human beings, and particularly the rights for women. And if they don't govern themselves accordingly, the Democrats, if they don't respond accordingly, then what can we do when Donald Trump wins again in 2024? Because there have been so many voter suppression laws passed around this country. And, oh, by the way, the Supreme Court now goes to a 7-2 conservative majority. And then, by the way, he gets all these appointments. We're going to be living in the prelude to The Handmaid's Tale, as much as people have alluded to that over the years, over and over again. The writing is on the wall, and I just don't know if the Democrats are seeing it.
All right, we just have about a minute left, but I'm no fan of Nancy Pelosi's on a whole host of things, but in the context of what you're talking about, what more can she do? It seems to me the whole game is in the Senate at this point.
Yeah, the game is in the Senate, but it's also like the collective action of the Democrats. Like, are they Nancy's floor speech this week was speaking about the importance of bipartisanship. And I get that is in itself a political move to apply pressure to Republicans, right? But it's also just like this overwhelming sentiment that is lingering over the Democratic Party. They have more respect for the institutions than the outcomes for their citizens. And they have this fetish for bipartisanship. And so I throw her in there particularly because that speech, just like, it was just, stabbing me in the chest, because I'm like, we're at a point where Republicans did away with bipartisanship back with Newt Gingrich, right? That it's been gone since he was a Speaker of the House. And if the Democrats are still fighting that battle, Joe Biden included, if they don't understand that that's a wrap, then we're going to find ourselves in a much different America than we can ever restore.
And even if they're paying lip service to it because they think there's some voters out there that are going to respond to it, what they're also should be aware that their messaging is that they're not out there trumpeting the fact that the Republican Party is incapable of bipartisanship.
Absolutely.
That is the message that they should be offering.
That's it.
Why aren't we getting bipartisanship? Well, the answer is quite obvious why we're not getting bipartisanship. So the answer has to be like they're 10 years too late with their talking points. Let's put it that way.
That's it.
Ben Dixon. Always a pleasure. Folks can check out the Benjamin Dixon Show on YouTube. What else? You're doing shows every morning too, right? So,
yeah, we have a morning show, like it or not, and still doing the Benjamin Dixon Show podcast, all on the the Benjamin Dixon Show YouTube channel.
All right. Ben, thanks so much. Really appreciate
it. Ben.
Take care. Take care.
All right, quick break, and we'll be right back with wrapping up the week. So that's it. Quite a week in the news. Hopefully, next week brings at least some peace and security for everyone in that region. That involves Palestinians who are living in their homes for decades, and folks who are trying to pray and whatnot. So not just eat dinner, but all of those things. Emma and I will see those of you who watch us on Peacock next week. In the meantime, we will see you then.
Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
And for those of you who are sticking around, folks, we're in for a treat. We're going to have a huge fight with Ben Burgess.
Oh.
Yeah, over cancel culture.
And we're going to give him an argument.
Exactly. When you were
that's
going...
That's what we should have called this episode, give him an argument.
That's right.
Argue with Ben.
Right.
Well, that doesn't work as well.
Yeah.
I'm going to take my break. Bye.
How about this? Okay. Emma's going to step out for a second, and then we'll have Ben come in. We could have been like, oh, here's your argument.
Yeah.
Or, well, we'll take your argument. You got to go. What are you doing?
No,
I'm vamping.
Well, because I just thought it was fun to talk about. All right, I'm leaving. Bye.
I'm vamping. I'm trying to do it. Trying to fill time. Folks, in the meantime, just a reminder, this show relies on your support. You can become a member at jointhemajority.report.com. And check out, we've got all sorts of different things going on. I don't know if did we get the server up, the big server thing? Check it out on our Discord channel. I can't remember if we achieved it yet. Also, you can go to Majority Discord if you're watching or listening on different platforms. It's an opportunity for people to get together, and we've got people posting, organizing opportunities and protest opportunities and donating opportunities, and we're just expanding on a daily basis. Check that out. It's great. It's great. A great community. Our fans, our audience in this program are second to none as far as I'm concerned. And really, actually, a lot of people are concerned. I mean, they're not concerned. My point is that as far as a lot of people say. Don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, you get 10% off. Somebody just IM, Tim Pool's working on a sitcom. Please be true. That's from Sam McKee. Island full of noises. NPR must have listened to your show. They just put out an article entitled Young Activists See the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict as a Power Struggle Akin to the Movement for Black Lives. And Militant Apathy says, if the Senate flips Manchin, we'll switch parties. I don't know. If he was going to do that, now would be the time. Right? Because he would be the fulcrum. Let's get Matt. Why don't you just tell us what's happening in the Matt Leckin universe?
Yeah, last night, David Griscom and I had Brandon Sutton on to talk a lot about different culture war and sort of culture war adjacent topics, like, let's say, the emphasis on masks in this country. We all know masks are important, but why is it like the thing we're talking about? And for instance, like South Dakota, right? South Dakota doesn't have such a high death rate because of poor mask usage, although it did have poor mask usage. It had the deaths because of Sturgis and the governor's decisions. Anyway, talking about that sort of stuff, also some Israel-Palestine and Democrats. Last night, patreon.com/leftreckoning. Go subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're like 100 away from 10,000, I think.
What?
Unless I'm misremembering that. I'm pretty sure that's right, though.
Okay.
Yeah,
I thought...
we're getting close to 10,000.
And folks, don't forget, it's Femme Friday on The No McKee Show. You can check that out at youtube.com/The No McKee Show. Do we have Ben?
Yeah, 1 second. He'll be joining us now.
Let's get him in. Apparently, your Gravel, somebody saw a preview of your Gravel video. And
Yeah, it's coming out
dropping
today. Right, that's a way to look. It's Ben.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome back to the program the host of Give Them an Argument and the author of Canceling Comedians While the World Burns, out now from Zero Books, Ben Burgess. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. It's good to be back. It's like it does feel a little strange and a little sad since the last time I was on was a Michael Thursday, but yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah. That I mean, maybe for another day, but that has always been something I've been sort of like conscious of and sort of weirded out about a little bit. But let's move through that, and let me ask you this: why can't we ourselves into a better world?
Because the effect of it is the opposite of what we want. In order to achieve a better world, that we need to build solidarity and help people to focus not on the moral character of individuals, but on creating better structures of society. And to the extent that we end up being very focused on, morally judging people and kind of excommunicating them for their perceived sins, we're doing the opposite of that.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, just to be provocative, I feel like a lot of the people who are, most like the people in the liberal sphere who are most critical of like the carceral state and how punitive it is are very quick to be cancelers in terms of just like people don't have the ability to rehabilitate themselves in the public eye at the very least. And I understand that, like, to an extent it's about powerful people, so there's that, but it is this emphasis on the individual that I think rubs you the wrong way, and at least rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, I'd also point out that that people being like having tweets be misinterpreted and go viral and having and possibly facing professional consequences for that is not only something that happens to powerful people. If you read like John Ronson's book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, a lot of his examples are of people who would be, nobody would have ever heard of if not for that. But even when we are talking about somewhat powerful people, which certainly comes in degrees, being the editor of Teen Vogue is not like being the Secretary of Defense. And in that instance, right, there was a recent incident where somebody who was hired as the editor is a woman in her late 20s, and 10 years before, she has, as a teenager, she had tweeted things that were trying too hard to be edgy and edging into mild racism, and she had apologized for them many times. But she was still, successfully, pressured to resign, or, in a corporate environment like Condé Nast, when you say you're doing that, right, whether that's a nice way of being fired or resigning is often unclear. And I do think that there is a kind of performative contradiction in the way that you're talking about, because presumably anybody who's a leftist, who works for them, which is quite a few people. I mean, weirdly enough, there's a lot of very left content at Teen Vogue these days, that presumably thinks that we're too carceral as a society, certainly supports, banning the box on employment applications, so that once you get out of prison, your criminal record won't be held against you. And it does sit very uncomfortably to, on the one hand, say, like, a rapist who gets out of prison should be allowed a second chance, and to have, and should be able to have a, productive career and everything like that. But that somebody who was guilty of bad tweets, 10 years ago, should not, right? I mean, like, I'm sure there are ways that you can make those two positions consistent, but I mean, at the very least, I think there is a little bit of tension there.
Okay. Now, I got to be honest. Like, when Matt said that he was going on your show a couple of weeks ago, and we were all getting geared up, I think Matt thought it was going to be spicier than it turned out to be, and it was not. You guys didn't get as much an argument as that. Like, and then I was excited to get into an argument with you about it.
You were excited to give him an argument.
I was excited to give you an argument, but I think, like, let's be clear here, though, in terms of just even that analogy. Sure. The rapist has gone to prison, and presumably had some moments of accountability. Now, I mean, if we're talking about, like, the severity of the accountability, but I have a real problem with this, with just even the concept that a cancel culture is like a new phenomena, and that's one of the problems I have with just the whole idea of this, so-called cancel culture. The other problem I have with it is like, why is it necessarily and I agree there are excesses involved in it, of course, without a doubt, like anything else for that matter. But why is it that that thing can't coexist with the type of politics that are a little bit more material based and maybe much more material based? I mean, look, the fact is, and I don't want to get too far afield because I'm presenting two different questions here, but the fact is that our whole society has been involved in a culture war at least since, I don't know. I mean, probably for the past 60 years, and since the 60s, and that culture war has taken on different issues at different times. But in 1993, Pat Buchanan is at the Republican convention talking about how disgusting it is that or maybe I guess it was Dan Quayle who was the vice president nominee at the time, like how disgusting it was that Murphy Brown was having a child out of wedlock. For those of you youngs, Murphy Brown's not a real person. Murphy Brown was a sitcom character. Okay, I mean, so this cancel culture has been going on, or at least like this cultural fight. The cancel part of it that has been going on is like, I don't know. Why didn't I get this job? Well, it was because you came in with your hair too long, or you came in and, you wrote about this somewhere. We're not going to tell you. We're not going to broadcast it. It's just that like the power has been democratized as to who gets to succeed in society and why.
Yeah. So there were two questions there, but first I'm very curious about which of Matt's appearances on the show this was and what he thought he was going to argue with me about. But going to have to get some clarification from that. This was later.
This was your appearance on our show, Ben.
Sorry. It was your appearance on Left Reckoning. Sorry.
Left Reckoning. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Just like to keep track of that. Whether Matt should be allowed back in the show. So, yeah, I think. I think on the newness, question. I think the issue is really what we're talking about. And I would actually also separate out two different things, which is one of them is the general phenomenon of, what's sometimes called cancel culture, or I feel like a slightly older and maybe more accurate term was call out culture, which is something that infects the entire political spectrum. And so that's one issue. And then the other issue is how it affects the left, which is what I care about as a leftist who wants the left to be more effective, which is the focus that article in Jacobin you're referring to. We can't cancel our way into a better world, and is of course the focus of the book. So on that first question, this sort of general cancel-y trends in the larger culture, and how new they are. I don't think it's a binary thing, right? Like either this is totally without precedent, or there's like nothing new or different, right? So I would argue that there are a lot of different factors that have come together to make it more of a problem in the last several years. So like, for example, the thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the article about Jeopardy, where you had 450 former Jeopardy contestants who signed this open letter denouncing a current winner for making a gesture with his fingers to indicate that he won 3 times, which to them looked like something that it's, some people say is a white supremacist thing, although there's Snopes says it's usually, not, it's just a normal gesture that everybody makes. And I think that's something, maybe you disagree. I would have a very hard time imagining like hundreds of normie Jeopardy contestants, getting together on something like that in like the 1990s. But
I'm sorry. That to me seems like a technological issue, right? I mean, it's just like, I mean, because I know on the right they were doing that in the 90s. It's just that they were doing it through churches or through direct mailers. I mean, they were. There's no. I mean, I mean, all my examples are from like 2005, but like Lenny the Shark is teaching kids how to be, trans. I mean, this was a real thing in whatever that kids movie was. I mean,
your examples are kind of on the of people on the right.
Yeah, no, they're on they were doing this on the right because they had the organizational structure to do it. They had churches. This was happening. It was.
Yeah.
I mean, Jeopardy contestants probably wouldn't do it, but they would have no way of getting in touch with each other. Now,
so I do agree with you that part of the difference is technological, and I think that the technology makes a difference in a couple ways. One of them, sure, is just ease of communication, but another one is that I think that social media platforms are designed to be as addictive as at all possible. They're for-profit platforms. This is none of it, controversial, I think. And in particular, I think that the feedback loops that are built into them tend to reward our canceliest impulses. So an example I often think of is from last year, when Wendell Potter, who, for people who aren't familiar with him, was a former health insurance executive who had a come to Jesus moment about the issue, many years back, and has since devoted his life to fighting for single payer. And he tweeted something that was a very typical Wendell Potter tweet. It's like, oh, the fact that people don't realize how much Medicare for all would help us during the pandemic is really a sign of how much, how people believe the lies that I told when I was a health insurance executive. He's tweeted stuff like this nonstop for years. And somebody quote tweeted that, presumably having no idea who he was, and said, oh my God, this blanking piece of blank, blanking admitted it. And that had gotten 75,000 likes before enough people told him who Wendell Potter was that he took it down. And my point isn't that this particular person, who tweeted it should do better, although, it's that, why didn't he, right? Because he could have. It would have taken 3 seconds to click on Wendell Potter's name at the top of the tweet, see his Twitter bio, and see all the single payer stuff there. The reason he didn't, I think the feedback loop that's built into it is you get that little endorphin rush of likes and retweets for throwing the first stone in something like this. And so it really rewards it. I think if you put that together with the fact that we live in a neoliberal hellscape where people are incredibly atomized, they often feel most connected to each other online. And you put that together with the fact that most Americans work in at-will workplaces, non-unionized. So doxing is a real, is like a very potent threat. I think that all of that stuff adds up to make this much more toxic and a much bigger problem, again, for everybody. I mean, I think that, you can trivially easily find examples all over the political spectrum of this happening. But what I'm concerned with, and maybe this takes us to your second question, the sort of, was it the meme question, why not both? I think that the problem from my perspective is that oftentimes the way that it plays out in the left is that we're way too quick to believe the worst possible interpretation of what each other do, that because the party line from so many people is, cancellation, smanchulation, nothing to see here. So we don't even see it as a problem when we do it. And I think that makes it, I think that creates a toxic atmosphere that's very unappealing to a lot of people that we might otherwise win over. And I think that makes it harder to build solidarity for those larger goals. I think it makes people more likely to burn out.
So why is this, I'm just like, a lot of this is based in social media critique, right? So, can you expand it to a larger critique of like culture? Does this exist outside of, Twitter or which is a huge part of it, I understand. And like, I think your point about the dopamine hits of likes mixed in with the dopamine hits of I'm better than, Louis C.K. or something like that. Like that is probably quite addictive to people. But outside of social media, is it cancel culture then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that, again, I do think part of the problem comes from the structure of social media itself, although that's also a big problem. I think it's way too easy to say, whatever, log off, don't worry about it, go for a run. But of course, in 2021, social media, the internet in general, is a huge part of where political education, political discussion, even political organizing takes place. We just finished a year where that was the only place that it could take place outside of rare exceptions. So I think that's a real problem, even to the extent that it is. I'm not convinced that it is solely confined to that, though, because I think that if you look, for example, at ways that it spills over into real life with people getting fired and stuff, if you look at the way that, like the Barbara Ehrenreich example I give in the Jacobin piece, that you had like Time magazine, sort of casually repeating, the sort of most harsh version of the accusation against her. I do think that's a problem in real life, and I want to just make one real quick point about this, which is that so far what we've mostly been talking about is this general cultural problem and how it might infect the left. But I think that there's also an element of this that is something that there's a problem. There's something else that's at play here, which is more specific to us, which is that for so long, any kind of option to the left of liberalism has been so far out into the wilderness in American political life that before basically 2015, that was like people like Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn spent most of their lives as very marginal backbenchers. Anything more radical than that was completely off the table. And I think in that environment, it's very easy to start to think of left politics less as a serious project to change the world than as a kind of symbolic moral stand against the world that we're living in right now. And I think that can be bad in a lot of ways that I talk about in the book. But I think that one way is that it can lead people to get much more cancelly with each other on the left, because if all you're really doing is exhibiting your moral commitments, then it can be very easy to let that shade into spending all of your time interrogating whether everybody else is really sufficiently morally committed. I mean, I heard Sam Seder was an effing sellout. Like that we should like that. There is I think that there is a lot of that comes out of those sort of pathologies of powerlessness. And what I'm worried about is that when we're suffering from that already on the left, and also there are these sort of general trends because of technological change, because I would argue neoliberalism, that it adds up to a really toxic cocktail that I think even in petty examples, like people yelling at each other at the DSA convention because one of them says, hey guys, don't make loud noises, because some people might have noise sensitivity, and somebody else says, oh my God, he just said, hey guys, that's gendered language, don't do that. That's not something that I think makes us look like a club that most people want to join. And I'm concerned about that because I want everybody to join the club because I want us to win.
I want to just put a pin in that second part because I really do think that is actually the sort of the most fertile and interesting ground. And I think we're the first part about the Wendell Potter thing. That to me is like to call that cancel culture, that the problem there is cancel culture, I think is it is the term becomes really unhelpful because, like, for instance, when Mike Cernovich essentially created a firestorm about a tweet that I had 9 years earlier, that was in response to, I think most people know this story, but it was in response to a Roman Polanski. There were people, and I was more associated with the entertainment industry at that time, just in terms I had more relationships. Friends I knew had signed a petition by 100 directors to essentially allow a Roman Polanski come back in the country and get like a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Oscars or something, despite the fact that he had been out of the country on the lam, as it were, for the rape of a 13-year-old girl. And I wrote it at the time, a satirical tweet that was to the effect, I don't quote it, but I think it's probably pretty close. Like, I don't care about Polanski. I just hope that if my daughter is ever raped, it is by an older man with a great sense of mise en scène. And And Mike Cernovich paid Jack Posobiec to dig through my tweets. They searched the term rape. That's all they could find. They put that out there. It was retweeted by Donald Trump Jr. and Seb Gorka, and it got me essentially fired from MSNBC for a couple of days. But the bottom line is, like, that to me was not cancel culture. That was some guy weaponizing what public, doing what is this era's version of a public smear campaign. And when you tell me the Wendell Potter story, that's an idiot. That person who did that with Wendell Potter is an idiot. Wendell's been a guest on this show for, 12 years. And, that's just somebody who doesn't know what they're taught. They're just an idiot. And yes, it hurt Potter in that moment. 75,000 people repeat this. But to say that that's cancel culture, and that's the same thing as saying that, like, somebody who is, that Charlie Rose, let's say, what happened to Charlie Rose, to say that those two things are part of the same phenomena, the essence of the phenomena is the same for those two, just seems wrong to me. Like, one is using a mechanism to hold someone to account, but it's fraudulent. It's a fraudulent interpretation that you're holding them to. The other is using a mechanism to hold another person to account who has not had to deal with any type of accountability and has been fortunate enough to live in a society where they have more latitude. And I think that, I can come up with examples of people who I think were unfairly canceled. Like, I think, frankly, Matt Taibbi, what other issues that people may have with him, but I said at the time, and I still believe, like, there were no accusers. There were no accusers for Matt Taibbi. He didn't have any. And yet it destroyed the rollout of his book. And I thought that was, wildly unfair. But I think that was, like, there was people who were disingenuously doing things. But I think there's other people who do stuff who, like, lose their audience, or at least a big part of their general audience, that I think is like, you know what? That's okay. That's fair. And I think there's also a quality of this, like, maybe sometimes it goes too far, but if you're talking about changing, I can tell you, when stuff went down during that time with Louis and other people, I would talk to managers out there who were, and lawyers and guys, and there were a lot of people who were afraid. And I was like, maybe you've been inappropriate. If it changes their behavior, I don't think that's a bad thing, actually. And which is not to say that I think everything that happened with Louis was fair. Yeah. But some of it I do. And I'm and I consider myself very sympathetic to Louis' position. I've disclosed in the past, I spoke to Louis after the fact. And, I think there are some things in the reporting that was unfair, and that, but I also think there was, like, there's a debt that builds up, right? That if you don't address certain things, and there's a debt that builds up. And I think, like, that's I think that's a dynamic that happens across the board. I just think that, like, that phenomena of accountability is not new. What's new about it is two things. One, technology and a methodology that can be abused. And two, that it provides that methodology and technology provides power to a different set of people in society that it doesn't equalize things, but it certainly changes the dynamic.
Yeah. So what I'd say about all of that is that I think what I would think of as cancel culture or call out culture or whatever you want to call it. I'm not really that concerned about fighting about words, but with whatever sort of phenomenon is under discussion, is a bunch of trends that we talked about earlier that I think converge in hair trigger, mass denunciations, and oftentimes an atmosphere of sort of mutual surveillance, right? We're going to see if we've got anything, that we can hold against you. And of course, the fact that hair trigger denunciation is bad doesn't mean that nobody ever deserves to be denounced or to lose their job. I mean, if you're sexually harassing people, whatever, like there's certainly, there certainly are cases where that's appropriate. But one, I think that this stuff is incredibly capricious in terms of who is taken down and who is not. There's no sort of principle there in ways that would actually be most helpful to people who might be victims of things that actually do deserve to be protected from. And two, I don't think the fact that Cernovich was trying to smear you, or the fact that the person who tweeted the thing about Wendell Potter was an idiot, I don't think that either of those negate the larger problem. In other words, that the question to my mind is, how is it that this many people are this ready to jump on a bandwagon like that, which is what can lead it to be abused by bad faith actors, or just sort of, stumbled into unintentional abuse, by idiots, because bad faith actors and idiots are always going to exist. I mean, that's inevitable. The sort of question is, I realize this gets us into the question of solutions, which is the hardest part of it. I mean, I've got some thoughts, but the question is whether we want to live in a world where it's just that easy, right? And in particular, coming back to the question of the left, and sort of instances of left on left, cancellation with Barbara Ehrenreich or Natalie Wynn or other things like that. Whether having a movement where we don't even sort of see this stuff as a problem is helpful for sort of building solidarity and getting people to focus on that kind of more material politics.
Yeah, I want to let me just say one more piece to that, and then I want to turn to that other part about, you said like the sort of the inter-left sort of assessments. I mean, I think that like my sense of this, and it may be wrong, is that there was my daughter was part of a generation, I think the first generation, that had over 50% saturation with phones at a certain age or something. And I think when I'm convinced this is a technology issue more than anything else, because that's the only way that, social media is the way that people get famous for doing this. I mean, I remember that woman, she has since left this sphere. I cannot remember her name, but she is the one who wanted to cancel Colbert. I don't know if people remember that from way back. I mean, this is even pre-Emma's time, but this is before people even referred to it as cancel culture. But literally the hashtag, I think, was cancel Colbert, because Colbert had done, I think, I can't remember what it was. It was a joke that was perceived. I don't even want to say what it was because I honestly can't remember. But and so I really do think this is a technology issue, and I think that there was a
Brendan saying the joke.
I don't think that's correct. I don't want to say what it is because I'm not convinced about that. Okay. But there was a time where it was like, I was really, really careful to make sure that my daughter, it was like to explain to her, like, you can't send pictures to guys like that are inappropriate that you think are going to be protected. Let's say, this wasn't an issue, but I wanted to make her understand this dynamic, because if you put stuff into digital now, it's a totally different world. Like this is going to exist for decades somewhere, and you're going to give people the opportunity to, and I think society had to make a big change, right? Like, I mean, there's stuff that I did in college or in high school or in junior high that I mean, I'm not thinking of anything specific, but I am really glad is not living online forever. And, there was, the idea of like, whatever, people plagiarize or whatever it is, or they get kicked out of a dorm or whatever it is. And some kid got kicked out of the school they were in, or that's a big advantage that my generation had, is that like you had an opportunity, your past was disposable in many respects. Like it didn't have durability more often than not, unless it became a newspaper story and it was on microfiche. But it is that doesn't exist today. And there's going to have to be there's going to be, it's for better and for worse. There's going to have to be an adjustment to what you do, and there's certain things you can't trust. Privacy has a different definition now. And I think just as people are adjusting to that reality, they also have to adjust to the reality of like the way that what we're calling call out culture, cancel culture operates. And I'm convinced in 5 or 10 years, the Wendell Potter of his time can get 72,000 likes, and people are just going to be like, that has no relevance. Like we've already figured out we've already developed the antibodies for that type of thing. There's some other, as a society, we no longer hold the faith in what one person tweets in the same way. I think to a certain extent it's already happened on some level, right? And that may mean less accountability for some people, frankly. Like, I don't know, like, would Chris Cuomo survive at a slightly different era to find out that the guy's been, helping his brother message? I mean, you shouldn't do that as a host of CNN, right? I mean, when you have him on as a guest, that's not, but I think like CNN's inoculated on some level.
Well, I mean, my understanding is that everything that's bad that the Cuomo brothers ever did is just Italian culture. So that's
discrimination.
But
exactly, it's the Sopranos. It's like anti-Italian discrimination. So I think so part of the issue here that I would say, there's the descriptive disagreement, maybe, right? Like, what's going on? Are there things that we can coherently like sort of group together as a trend? How should we think about it? And then I think there's a strategic issue. So part of that strategic issue gets into the intra-left stuff, but there's also a part about how like leftist progressives, should think and talk about this issue in general, because I think that part of the problem is that the culture war dynamic tends to be that if somebody on the other culture war team makes a big deal of something, the sort of automatic response is to put a minus wherever they put a plus, and vice versa, and sort of bitterly fight about that, which means that because in the last year, I think especially, like the politics of this issue have gotten very weird. Like if you compare even 2020, when the Harper's letter happened, to 2021, I think there's been a thing where Republicans and conservatives have sort of latched on to the fact that this is a thing that a lot of people are concerned about, and then their strategy is then just to lump in everything they don't like with it, right? So Mr. Potato Head, whatever, like just the any sort of random bullshit that has nothing to do with anything, they'll sort of lump in with that, and it gets confusing and incoherent. But then I think oftentimes the left strategy is just to say, well, there's no such thing. What are you talking about, right? It's not a problem. And at least assuming that, I mean, of course, if there really is, if I'm wrong about the descriptive issue, then maybe you should say that, regardless. But if not, I think that might be strategically misguided. I think that we might be better off saying, like, trying to take control of the issue, and to say, look, these guys can complain about it, all day and all night, but they don't really have any solutions. Whereas there are things that happen within a left program that would not completely eliminate the issue, but I think alleviate some of the harms that it causes. So certainly rebuilding the labor movement, ending at-will employment. I know this is more radical and controversial, but I would also say taking social media companies into public ownership, so that the sorts of decisions that they make about algorithms and stuff would be different than ones that they might make based on profit incentives. That, like, these are things that can actually help, right? So rather than just saying there's no problem, there's nothing to see here, like, if you think that there's a problem, that's just because you've been propagandized to. I think like a more of a winning message might be, this is a problem and here are some things we can do about it.
I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily nationalize. I would chop them up with antitrust, and I would also part of that antitrust is also just sort of say like, oh, we're not going to allow for certain algorithms that you deploy. Like we're just not going to. That's it. I mean, you take it or leave it, that type of situation. I don't know if we want the government responsible for those decisions because that becomes a huge mess. What is easier is to say, like, here's some regulations that we're not going to allow you're not going to be able to mix from this pile and that pile and to create your algorithms because it's anti-competitive and it's going to cost you guys a lot of money, but there's going to be 8 Twitters. And it's just not going to be as effective for you.
So if there are 8 Twitters, I mean, I don't know how much we want to get off on this, but like, I guess I've never completely understood the mechanics of how this proposal works. Like, is it like literally that like, okay, I'm friends with Emma on Twitter 1, and I'm friends with Sam on Twitter 2, and I got to remember, which one, or like, because oftentimes when people talk about breaking up the social media companies, like I can understand saying, okay, Facebook and Facebook Messenger and Instagram can be different companies, but that still leaves Facebook as like a massive, controlling like a massive amount of the flow of information.
If you split up, in addition to Facebook and let's say Instagram, if you split up, let's say the advertising mechanisms and the algorithms that come from advertising cannot mix with the algorithms that come from your friends. The reason why you end up getting multiple Facebooks there is because none of it is as profitable. And so they don't have the ability to scale in the way they do. They don't have the ability, and you're not allowing them to buy their competitors. So there's a lot more competitors going to crop up. It is going to make the social media experience less integrated and maybe, in some ways less functional, but so what? I mean, it's like, this is my argument about YouTube. Like, how about this? No algorithm. Like, you're not allowed to get the data from your users that allow you to feed them certain things. Like, you can't track what they've watched. How about that? Like, I mean, that's going to make it impossible for us to become, make a zillion, dollar revenue. Yeah, it is. Sorry.
Might hurt our show, though. I mean, like, if, say, someone wants to watch Ben, we might get recommended. Like, I feel like you can make the...
It would, without a doubt, hurt our show. But I'm talking about a solution that is, like, better for society. I mean, I was an advocate for the fairness doctrine, and the people at Air America, like, you can't do that, dude, because the only reason why we can survive is because of format, format purity. And I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like, like the whole point where we're doing this is to make society better. And
it's better to have a society without Clear Channel or Air America than a society with both.
Absolutely. Like, I'll go find something else to do, or we'll figure out another way of finding our audience. Like, that's not, the primacy of the business model is not there. But anyways, but we don't, that's for another episode. But I want to get into the part that you said, like, training people. And I think this is a really interesting idea, and I never heard it articulated, that you said that being in the wilderness, and it's true, it wasn't until 2015. Like, I mean, we would have Bernie Sanders on back in 2004 on our, and I don't know if there was another national media outlet in the country that didn't have him on as some type of, like, sort of freak. Like, you can see Phil Donahue shown. It's like, look at this guy. Whoa. And, like, how does it feel to be, and
how does it feel to be the bearded lady?
Yeah, exactly. And we would just have Sanders on, to on Janine and I on the show, just be like, this is a great congressman. And people would call in and go like, you're liberal. And I'm like, dude, it's a progressive radio station. Of course I am. In fact, I'm to the left of that. And they would just, oh my God, you just said it in public. And it's like the term liberal, the term liberal went from the really like you, from the right, as deployed from the right, was like basically calling someone a child molester in 2005. And now it's like basically calling somebody a child molester from the left.
Right.
And it is, I mean, the change has been dramatic, but just talk more about that idea that being in the wilderness there ended up being like, hey, I have found some discrepancies in your ideological makeup. Because I mean, for me, I've never been terribly interested in, you know, sort of what my naming my ideology. I don't. My ideology has a name, or maybe it's sock dem, but it is. I would see, you know, we had libertarians calling, like I'm an oncologist libertarian, or I'm a ontologist, or whatever it is. But my point is like, I'm like, I don't care. Just tell me what it is you want to do. But talk about that concept.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think that's an interesting analogy because even though, of course, people who are like soft libertarians have far too much power in the real world, the sort of like really special people who would maybe call into this show and talk about how, you know, we don't need to have sidewalks and stuff like that, sort of also maybe knew that they weren't going to be able to fulfill that program anytime soon. So there might have been similar dynamics going on there. But yeah, I think that you know, what I call in the book, you know, the pathologies of powerlessness is something that can manifest in a lot of different ways, because, and like to think about like what we're talking about, like I often think of my friend Daniel Bessner, who likes to point out, like if you read like Noam Chomsky, and I love Noam Chomsky, no shade on Chomsky whatsoever, but like if you read Noam Chomsky, there's never a point where like on 100 page 97 or something, he says, okay, if a socialist government took power, here's how it would deal with this foreign policy problem. Because during most of the time that he's writing, that would just, like, that was so far from being something that you would worry about, you know, that it would sort of feel like saying, well, when I'm, you know, enthroned as the emperor of the galaxy, here's what I'll do, you know. And the problem is that when you're in that situation for a very long time, that like you can basically either just be like a, you know, liberal, or you can sit on the sidelines, you know, angrily rereading, you know, the collected works of Marx and Engels, you know, for the 10,000th time, then I think it's very easy to start to think about politics less as a concrete effort to change the material world, and more as a kind of symbolic protest against the many injustices of the world around you, and I think that's what leads people to do everything from, if you think about like a certain, I don't want to exaggerate, I think it's a tiny sliver, right? You know, even of the online left, but like if you think about people who make a big performative point about like trying to rehabilitate the reputation of authoritarian governments, that, you know, say like, you know, for whatever the, you know, Comrade Stalin did nothing wrong, you know, whatever people like, what's making them tick, right? Like why would you do that, right? You know, because if your effort is to actually try to convince people that like a better form of, you know, socialism, you know, which should be democratic as possible, that would be the most counterproductive thing possible. But if you really want to feel like you're taking the hardest, most radical stand possible against the society that you live in, that starts to make sense. I would argue a lot of arguments about voting, you know, there's similar dynamics. I would argue that that some of the ways that people argue about are very attached to sort of very radical sounding slogans that start with the word abolish, but often don't have very clear meanings. You know, is a function of that, and I also think that a function of it is that you tend to get a lot of intensity about very, very small differences, because if you can't change the world around you, you can at least change the, you know, the little socialist organization, you know, that you're in or whatever. You know, you can at least take that over and bend it to your will. You know, if you live in a world where it's incredibly difficult, you know, like this many years after the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, to get landlords to obey it, and that's incredibly frustrating. But you can at least get DSA to, you know, to tell people they can't clap, you know, and that scratches some of the same itch. And then I think in particular, it does, I think, oftentimes coincide with, like mixing with these larger cultural trends. I think it does lead to a situation where we become incredibly concerned, with seeing whether everybody else is exhibiting the correct level of moral commitment. That, that if you can expose that someone who says they're on your side like really isn't, or isn't enough, or that they said something that might have just been a clumsy joke but might have been like a revelation of how they really feel, that and you've exposed them and you've driven them out of the tent, you feel like you've done something politically, when I would argue that you're actually making it more difficult to accomplish anything politically, because you're making the left much less appealing. And because in order to change the world, you need to build solidarity with other people. And I think that this kind of thing is fundamentally counter-solidaristic.
Well, it's about working backwards from this very specific identity that you've carved out for yourself by, like, I am this very specific brand of leftist, and it's not about building power. It's really, to me, and it brings back to kind of the individualistic point, like from what we started, it's about like buttressing one's own individual sense of moral righteousness more than it is about building power in that way. And I think that's maybe a lot of what your critique centers on, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I just want to add, it's like it's about media consumption habits. People say they're moving left because they're listening to different podcasts, and like at a certain point, like what's the actual work that's being done for the left besides what you're deciding to put in your ears?
And also just like it allows you the comfort of being able to have an identity that you've perfectly curated, that is very specific and almost dogmatic and religious in a way that doesn't do anything to further leftist power. And it's like it's almost like a crutch for people who are insecure in their way to digest politics. In my opinion.
And I think that you see it in the way that since 2015, there is a certain kind of leftist who's like mad that like more people are calling themselves socialists. That's like that. They'll sort of it's like, well, all these people who really their politics are not nearly as good as mine, right, are suddenly aligning themselves with me and identifying with some maybe vague and confused. That's okay when people are starting to move politically. Oftentimes their ideas are vague and confused. That's something to work with, but like instead of seeing that as a good thing, like there are some people who really do react to that, like somebody who's like soured on their favorite band, because they've gotten too big.
I was just going to say that when you were saying that, what reminded me of when Smells Like Teen Spirit came out.
Yes.
I'm dating myself now, but when that came out, everybody who had seen Nirvana during the Bleach tour was like, this is bullshit. And it was like, and it's like, okay, I mean, I get it, because you think they're going to get maybe the fear was like, they're going to get big and they're going to lose their hunger and their music's not going to be as interesting. That seems like okay, but if the point is to get as many people identifying a vague set of politics that are significantly left of where that cohort was 3 or 4 years ago, who cares? That people are calling themselves this notion of and really, I think this came up in the first half of the show. Like at one point, I can't remember where the quote is from, but there was Israeli military who were confronted on their alliances with like the far right. I think it was in Europe, or it was either the Christian Zionists who were touring in Israel. And then somebody had said to this guy, like, they're here because they are hoping for the resurrection of Christ. And that means that you as a Jew are going to burn in eternal hellfire. And the Israeli, general was just like, well, I'll deal with that when, Christ comes back. And that's, like in the meantime, I'll take their money and I'll take their arms. And, I'm not.
The Lord and pass the ammunition.
Exactly. Fine. I mean, we can deal with the apocalypse when the apocalypse comes. But like in the meantime, they're helpful for my political project. Use it rather than sort of like, hey, when we take over and we are deciding who's going to be the ministry of whatever it is, I don't want you in my coalition because I could tell that you're just not, like you're getting ahead of yourself a little bit, it seems.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that you see it in like the obsession that a lot of people have with deciding that like that AOC, whatever. I mean, she's a politician. I think all politicians are basically mixed bags, but like people who are obsessed with like showing that, that there's like nothing positive about the fact that she's in Congress, or that like other people with, views vastly to the left of the Democratic establishment, are in Congress. And, the point is not that you can't like criticize somebody when you think they get something wrong. Of course you can, but like when it's sort of a strange obsession with showing that it's like, no, there's actually nothing positive or welcome there, then to me, that feels a little bit like missing your own marginality.
Yeah. Well, they're also, I mean,
and
there's
other stuff going on there.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's this like latent, incredibly like bizarre, sexually violent aspect of it too. That is just like.
I think that's true too, and I think there's also just sort of a profit motive. I mean, I think there's or whatever it is, whatever clout, profit, whatever it is. It's an identity, and there's this space is very much about sort of like branding and self-branding and self-marketing and that type of shit. So.
Well, I mean. Yes, from the creator's perspective, but from the people who are consuming it, there is a...
Yeah, I mean, it is probably like, whatever you think about any of these people, it is also probably like, okay, almost anything that you can say that would be critical, I mean, not literally everything, they're different people and they don't always have the same positions, but most of what you could say from a left perspective that would be critical of AOC would also be stuff that you could say about Bernie Sanders. In terms of attitudes towards the Biden administration, in terms of some places where you might wish that, there were less like normie Democrats, but I think the fact that, one of these is, is an old man and, and the other, is an attractive woman, it's like this, I don't think you need to be Sigmund Freud to think that there's like something going on there that that exacerbates it in a lot of cases. But also I do think that like there's something like that the fact that people are this eager to say that anything that looks like a victory can't be. Is revealing in itself, because if your goal is to have like achieve like give everyone healthcare and end the wars and further down the line do things that are more radical than that, then having as many people as possible elected who share as many of those goals as possible would be all to the good. And, and even if you do disagree with them about certain things, you'd present that in a different way than you would when you're denouncing your bitter enemy.
Right. I mean, and just to say, like in the context of the $1.9 trillion bill that was passed, on one hand, I cannot come up with a less efficient, more corruptish prescription to get people health care than to have the government subsidize Cobra. It's atrocious. It's atrocious. But at the other time, like, it's good that millions of people are going to get free health care for this period of time. Like, that is good. And I think we have to sort of like recognize that is good. The way that it's done is horrible, and you can also say that it was done that way because of how desperately afraid they are of setting up a better, a more efficient, and also more equitable system. But
yeah, if people start getting government directly from the government, they'll get used to it.
Yep. All right. Well, Ben Burgess, real pleasure. We should do this again. Thank you so much for joining us. Folks can find Give Them an Argument. When would people find that? On Mondays?
Yeah, Give Them an Argument is on Mondays at 8 p.m. Eastern. So that's and then there are other things going on during the week, but that's the main show. Is at 8 p.m. Eastern on Monday. And I guess just throw in a quick plug if you do want to buy the book, Canceling Comedians While the World Burns. Whereas I would rather that people buy it from Amazon than not buy it. I'd also say that if you would like it to be packaged and shipped by people who aren't peeing in bottles because they're trying to meet quotas enforced by constant electronic surveillance, Red Emma's is a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore that will ship it. You can order it from online. So that's redemmas.org.
All right, we'll put a link to the book at Red Emma's in the podcast description and the YouTube description. And we'll also just throw in a link to some folks we know who just pee in bottles, and we'll send those to you.
Well, I mean, it's fine if you're peeing in bottles because you enjoy it. I mean, like if you just, that's your preferred place to pee, I'm sure you can do that if you work at a co-op. But if you do have the preference to walk to the bathroom and then wash your hands and walk back and all that stuff, I do feel like that's something you should be able to do.
I'm glad as a show we're normalizing the peeing bottle fetish, right? I mean, so many people close to me have told me it's like, this whole Amazon fight, right? It's caused real discrimination.
Yeah, no problem.
Ben Burgess, thanks again. Appreciate it.
So, bye.
Folks, it's Freebie Friday because we only got about 15 more minutes left. We went way long with Ben, but that was a good talk.
Yeah, for sure.
Jonathan Armistead, I'll tell you what was unfairly canceled. Fox's 1996 sitcom, The Show. Thank you. It was a great show about race relations in a writing room of a late-night TV show, and had a fantastic episode where the lead character was going to stick it to the censors by doing a monologue naked. Seriously, though, can we come up with another term besides cancel culture? It just sounds so silly. I don't mean to be pedantic, but do people who practice this find pride in culture of canceling something? Would you all be open to playing Emma's Gravel? Shoot, it just went away. Video on Monday. I think it dovetails well with this conversation about building power. Left it. Even
How do you know?
The Tim Caucus.
Is it up?
We'll play it. Well, of course we'll play it. Of course we'll play it. Are you kidding? Of course we're gonna play it.
Sure. I mean, they wrote it for me. I just stood there and said it.
If every time period between the same calendar date is its own year, then Majority Report has been on the air in parts of 10,000 years. What a run.
You weren't here for this.
I don't know what the hell that means.
Andrew Giuliani said he had 5 decades of experience in politics, or he was a part of 5 decades of political experience. He's 35 years old. How do you think that works? And he said it twice on 2 different shows.
How do you make that work over 35 years?
90s, 2000s, 2010s.
No, because remember, he was 4 years old when 1990 hit. So he was
right.
He was alive in the 80s. He was alive in the 90s. That's 15 years. Alive in the
2000s.
Alive in
2010s.
2010s.
Now we're 2021. So he's claiming that at age 3 he was garnering significant political experience, and he thought this was such a salient political point that he said it on 2 different shows.
Wow. I love that guy. That takes a lot.
Well, we played his the SNL clip of Chris Farley playing him at City Hall, if you recall that, from many years ago.
Who was playing Giuliani there too?
I don't know.
Tokyo Gouda. Can I get a shofar for my 40th birthday today? Any life advice for this milestone? Does life start at 40 or is it downhill from here? Left is best. AC for Emma. Life does not start at 40, but it's pretty good at 40. But it does get downhill, but not quite that yet. You got a little bit of time.
Nice message.
Yep. Got a little bit of time. Which one of these clips should we do? Let's do a clip or 2 at least.
Gohmert.
What's that? Oh, Gohmert? Yeah, okay. Let's do Louis Gohmert. It's been a long time since we did this guy. Here's Louis Gohmert, who incidentally studied in the Soviet Union. I don't know if you knew this.
Well, that's questionable.
The Gohmericans is what we used to talk about. Louis Gohmert was one of we had a whole thing where Louis Gohmert was where we like a sleeper cell in and of himself. Still possible, but here he is.
You think Bernie Sanders is kidding about his disgust at billionaires? No, they'll take your money, they'll use it to win, and then after they win, they'll take your money and you either go to a gulag or you're put to death. But they're not going to leave billionaires around to manage things. They'll take your money and you will go the way as so many Soviets did.
First off, I love the fact that Louis Gohmert is appealing to billionaires and saying, stop trusting Bernie Sanders so much. I don't think that's a big problem. Like is he talking to like one person?
No, he's just like trying to create this, like, the liberals are the ones
but
that
he's
are in bed with the billionaires while he's trying to be like, I'm the one who's looking out for you.
He's addressing the billionaires that support Bernie Sanders. Like he's gonna come after you. And then he's saying like, we can't leave the billionaires to manage things. Does he not realize like that's also a problem?
Yeah, exactly. When did we decide that?
Hey, buddy, you were elected to Congress. You're supposed to be one of the guys managing things. We're not going to leave it to the billionaires to manage things. And then the other thing is that there's another way to get rid of the billionaires. You don't have to kill them. You can tax them in such a manner that they are no longer billionaires, and then you can allow them to run free.
Right, but the point is that he's saying they're going to take all your money and then they're going to put you to death because the billionaires are so inherently worthy of their money that they're too much of a threat to keep around. So once you take their money, you have to kill them.
All right, fair enough. Yeah. I mean, I think...
What's interesting, though, is it's actually a pretty good indication of Republican politics, a good synopsis, right? He's saying Bernie Sanders is serious, billionaires are going to die under the socialism, right? Okay, that's not true, but fine, take that. But poor people will die under Republicans if you take the inverse of those policies, right?
Yeah, I would also just like to point out, like, all these people that talk about the gulag, we are the #1 jailer on earth, right? Just in raw numbers. So I don't know what we're like posing as.
Well, we're posing that billionaires will potentially be in jail, which we know doesn't exist in this country.
And we don't call it the gulag. We call it jail. So it's better.
Right, but gulag sounds more Soviet.
That's my point, is that what he's worried about is that we're going to change the name of jail. And we're going to jail just as many people. In fact, he's worried we're going to jail less people, but change the name to gulag.
I want to lock up Louis Gohmert in Rikers Gulag.
There you go. And when you do lock him up, you need to put on the Louis Gohmert accent.
Well, obviously, I want him to feel at home in liberal New York's gulag.
Have fun sitting next to your billionaire friend who's dead, and we took his money, Louis.
You like a dead billionaire cellmate?
Did you happen to notice a sign when we brought you in here? Didn't say jail, did it? It said gulag. And you know who wrote that sign? Bernie Sanders. That's his handwriting.
Red paint. You know what red means?
What if we put the gulags on Mars? Then they might actually like it up there.
There you go.
You want to go up there so bad?
Here's your jetpack. One-way ticket to Mars gulag.
He's Bush now.
Gohmert's district is also in the bottom third of poorest districts in Texas.
That's because we won't let a billionaire manage it. All right. This is pretty good. Kevin McCarthy has some problems with math. And also some problems with masks and math. These people who are just like bitching about masks, I just find it just astonishing.
Do you think we'll see ads in the prime?
Who cares? who cares if everybody continues to wear their mask because they want to?
Do you think we'll see ads in the primary like this Republican was too pro-mask, so I'm going to run against them?
Yes.
I think that's conceivable, without a doubt.
That's a good prediction, Matt.
Here's Dr. Jim Stevenson wearing a mask months after the CDC said it wasn't required anymore. Here is Kevin McCarthy pushing this line that the requiring of masks is some way. These guys, they get really caught up in the sort of like the control, you know, and I think with Pelosi doing it, it's like there's emasculation type of issues here. I mean, the idea that the masks are the control. Well, I mean, people are starting to take off their masks. Who's supposed to be freaking out right now that they're losing this control? Or is it that we've already internalized the idea that like, if there's a pandemic, we better put the mask on.
Yeah. We're having an entire freak out among small business owners about if they can get people back into the workplace for the same wages. Meanwhile, it's the masks that are about control in society right now.
Right, exactly. We are going to roll back in a bunch of Republican states the extended or increased federal unemployment benefits. And we're worried about the control issue regarding masks.
And we're going to prevent you from wearing masks in school, even if you want to.
Yeah, exactly.
Texas and Iowa, I think it is, or Idaho, have outlawed mandating masks in schools. So schools who may even have an outbreak can't say you need to wear a mask. And I got news for you. That's going to happen. That's going to happen somewhere. Here's number 10.
So yesterday, the resolution that you brought to the floor about masks was tabled. Is there anything else that your conference can do or plans to do to change the mask requirements currently on the floor?
Well, we would just like to abide by the science. What's interesting is you look at this building, there's a chamber for the House and a chamber for the Senate. But apparently, COVID works differently in both chambers. Because in the Senate, you don't wear a mask. In the House, you have to wear a mask. The only difference is the Speaker. She doesn't want to abide by the CDC rules. She actually wants to have greater control. That, to me, is a real frustration on all that we have happen. How can the Senate not wear a mask and then the House in the same building? To me, it's all about it. That's not true.
Are you encouraging the rest of
You said 75%. Half your conference is 25%.
So for people that didn't hear that, the reporter said you said 75% of like the conference is not vaccinated. And McCarthy goes, you said half, it's a different number. And the reporter goes, half your conference is 25%. It's math.
Yeah. The bottom line is that there's a bunch of people in the House who are not vaccinated. And there's not as much of the people in the Senate who are unvaccinated. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. There's only 2 Republicans in the Senate out of 50 Republicans that are unvaccinated by my recollection. And it's something like only 93 Republicans in the House out of, I forget the exact breakdown, but it's 435 members of the House. Roughly cut that in half, 93 out of that half. I think, right? God, why am I doing numbers off the fly? The fly.
The bottom line is the reporter said half your conference is not vaccinated, and McCarthy said that's not true. And the reporter said, well, you said only 75% are vaccinated in the House. And just, it's understood that we know that all the Democrats are vaccinated.
Yes, every Democrat is. Right.
And McCarthy said, well, you said half. And the reporter said, well, yes. Half of your conference would represent 25% of the members of the House. Therefore, only 75%. I mean, McCarthy's just trying. I mean, first of all, he's an idiot, but he also is just trying to. Avoid this issue of they're not getting vaccinated, and the vaccine is 90, let's say it's 95%. I mean, we can't know exactly, but more or less between 90 and 100% effective in terms of preventing you. It's near 100% effective in preventing you from dying of COVID. it is near 95% effective in preventing you from getting COVID, period. But if you do get COVID and you're one of the 5%, you get it, you have the opportunity to pass it on. Look what happened with the Yankees. Okay, these guys are in close quarters. One of them got it. And they're all vaccinated, the vast majority of them, as far as I know. They got a strain. I think they only found out that they got it through testing. I don't think any of them were symptomatic in any. Right. And the problem is, if one of them goes into a store with somebody who's maybe hasn't gotten vaccinated, doesn't have the ability to get vaccinated, maybe immunosuppressed, whatever it is, or has someone like that as a family member, or if, let's say, you're a politician and you're in the business of shaking a lot of different hands, or seeing a bunch of different people, it's dangerous. And so, it's perfectly reasonable that you would wear masks there. And you know what else is even perfectly reasonable? That you say half the country, a third of the country, somewhere in between there, is not getting vaccinated. And many of those people are not getting vaccinated because, A, they are either politically disinclined to get vaccinated, and I do mean politically, or they live in a state that is controlled by people who are Republicans who are politically disinclined to get vaccinated. And so what we're doing is we're just signifying, we're just performatively wearing our masks to give those people who are holding up the vaccinations or hesitant to do so some type of encouragement to get vaccinated. That is also a legitimate exercise by the leaders of a country.
Republicans would never do anything performative.
That's true. That's way beneath them.
You forgot that.
Way beneath them.
I mean, they're going to get a staffer or a staffer's family killed from COVID doing this.
If it hasn't happened already.
Right, exactly. And I mean, we're on a downswing now, and hopefully that lasts throughout the summer. But I mean, Manitoba's having a spike right now. Like, I imagine there's a possibility we'll see another one that they have to try to cover up that eventually leaks out in publicly.
Hopefully not, just because like Canada's vaccine rollout's been like
it's actually picked up now, though.
It's picked up.
It's picked up dramatically.
But I mean, we're far ahead in terms of like.
They're starting to catch up. They're starting to catch up in Canada, and just in the past like 3 or 4 weeks, they're starting to catch up from a percentage standpoint. But we are going to have these outbreaks. There is going to be a news segment at one point over the next 6 months where like there's a spike in this city or that state, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. All right, last clip of the day, just because Steve Doocy, like where the hell, like maybe he's misspeaking here. That's the only thing I could say. Here, let's play this. Here's poor Steve Doocy on Fox and Friends, the only one who took COVID seriously on the show, and here he is.
Think about it this way, folks. Here in the United States of America, 52,000 Americans have died from COVID. 52,000. I was shocked to see that 33,000 of them actually lived here in New York City, which is shocking. 2 million Americans have been impacted. So how did it come to infect the entire planet?
Hold on. Like, I thought I was going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he thinks it's 520,000.
Yeah.
It's 580 by, plus.
Right.
He repeated it. Then he said 30,000 New Yorkers.
Well, in New Yorkers. So he could
New
make
York
that.
City.
Yeah, he could make that contrast.
Mm-hmm.
But then he also said there's 2 million Americans affected by it. And that, I don't even know what that figure could possibly be. You've had at least 580,000 deaths, right?
So
it's probably
52,000 New Yorkers have died of COVID.
New York Cityers. Oh, that's what he was. He got that wrong. I don't know where he got the other numbers. And the funny thing is he's looking around like
and New York City, 33,000 deaths.
Okay. He's looking at New York State. And maybe he's talking about 2 million New Yorkers.
And 2 million cases in New York State.
Yeah, that's what he meant. But at one point, you'd think somebody on the thing go like, wait, in the United States or in this state? But
all right, well, we figured it out.
There we go. We've cracked the Steve Doocy code.
The Doocy enigma.
Exactly. All right. Going to read a couple IMs, and then we got to get out of here. I'm sorry, folks. Dave Rubin, Democrat. If the conflict is entirely seen in secular terms, Israel looks horrible, so they menace worshippers around Al-Aqsa to provoke an explicitly jihadist response and make it a religious battle against scary Muslims. That may be the case. They also know like how to basically, force Hamas to respond. Sammy Key. I already read that one. The Tim Caucus. Oh, I read that one too. Militant apathy. Bernie was a genius to say Palestinian lives matter. It has a name now, and their movement can rightly piggy off of BLM. Love it. Boss move. PLM is going to be a thing.
It's like the natural next step. It's just like, anyway. When people see it in those terms, it's a lot easier to reach regular folks, I think.
Sam's worn out Floby. The vote of president on Capitol Police raising funding from AOC and Bowman is ridiculous and will only help serve the likes of Dimmy Jordan and his ilk to continue bashing them and claim they're not progressives. I mean, it will certainly have that impact. It was also Talib, I believe, also. We've been looking around for some type of explanation of it, and it is either that she was just really, she was genuinely disturbed by the whole thing and is, genuinely afraid but conflicted, or it could be B, they wanted to sort of buy into the idea that we shouldn't be giving cops more money, broadly speaking, particularly for just a failure of leadership that could have actually dealt with the thing. But she is, it seems to me, she is definitely trying to make some inroads and deciding that in some places she's not going to make a stand if she doesn't think that it's like structurally important. I think it's problematic to throw money at the cops there when they could have dealt with this. It's just that they didn't respond. Leadership was messed up. Pelosi's calling for the firing of them. They should be fired. I also don't like the idea of militarizing your capital. I think that just is bad. But from a structural standpoint, I'm not as like the implications of this. I would rather, if I was given we're going to give $1 billion, $2 billion to the Capitol Police, and we're going to, take away $500 billion in federal funding to police around the country. I would choose the latter as opposed to stopping the former. Let's put it that way. Not just because of dollars, but yes, it's a bad vote in my estimation. Sam soft collared shtick. Hey Sam, what type of joinery do you use mostly? Dovetails, half lap dominoes, or pocket holes? Do you have an Insta of your woodwork projects? I do not have an Insta. I use pocket holes quite a bit. I use just butt joints often. I don't know what half lap and dominoes are, and I sometimes use, biscuits.
What the fuck is
less? Now you know what it's like when you start going off about the football draft or something.
A football draft.
Radic-lib. Samglish is the word of the year. Resent is now a noun as well as a verb, replacing the archaic and ungainly resentment. Yes. And the final I am of the day. Oh, shoot. Hold on 1 second. Here we go. Dude, bro. Oh, shoot. Is PA real? We'll try one more. I don't know what that means. Nick from PA. Hey, MR crew. The PA state system of higher ed has been facing cuts and now slated for consolidation of 6 schools to 2. Tell folks to follow at Defenders Pass He. Defenders Pass He on Twitter as we are fighting against consolidation for a fully funded state system of free public higher education. That's Defenders Pass He on Twitter. All right, thanks all. All right, folks, Emma, Matt, Brendan, great job this week. Folks, see you Monday.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.